Once the endless cycles of existence are observed, what command moves the broken world? A broken world can be seen as a world that had attained a sort of level of performance. And when the greater levels of performance of a world's potential are denied, in some sense, failure collapses on the ground. Sometimes a broken world can be an inner broken world. It could be a sort of gaze upon the world that has no care, no sense of responsibility for the future, no sense of responsibility for the past, and if none of those are responsible for, guess the present moment you're not responsible for. For me, the greatest relationship with the sort of wisdom of my world has been in discovering the limits of my reach as I am inspired to reach further. As if you in some sense clap your hands to hear the echo. You do an action wondering how the universe engaged and how your eyes even engaged. For me, when the concept of karma, honestly guys, when the concept of karma came into my view, I was like, okay, eternal being endlessly incarnating. How lovely. But then I realized that there is a sort of paradoxical maneuverance in mystical thought, where as if the Zen master is not afraid of throwing paradoxes at your way, because the Zen master seeks to see if you are aware of the most immediate duality you function in. For me, you first want to fill a role. That's pretty much how our social system is designed. People open their eyes, they feel they can do things, and they go do them. Some people feel they can do things, but then they see they can't do them, and so they no longer feel they can do it. For me, alright, here, let me say it like this. I feel we as human beings, the moment we're born, we are introduced to a program of existence. This program of existence at its peak values objective accumulation and subjective accumulation. This is how the system has been. A world breaks when a personality trait in some sense fades or vanishes. Your attention keeps your ideas alive in your body. That is the primary focus of consciousness. It is here to allow objective reality to have a subjective dimension. Now, this subjective dimension is provided, and this subjective dimension is strangely taken for granted. We have just called it a mind, and we have not explored any further, and our stories and languages don't change fast enough for our results to be found. For me, language can be also seen as the cocoon that this evolving entity is in. And as this entity transforms from a caterpillar to a butterfly, from an individually personalized consciousness to a sort of collective unknown presence, this collective unknown presence will engage the experiential side of you more than the conceptual side. Because thoughts move in a room we can't see, yet the thought can be the room. You can look at your whole moment to just think for a second, is this all a thought? Am I having a thought, or am I actually existing somewhere and I'm also acknowledging in that same moment that there are thoughts? Thought was the ability of objectivity to look different to the creature. It was a sort of telescope. Like if you use a telescope to look at the stars at night, nice. But if you are still looking through the telescope as you're walking out through the day, that is foolishness. As our states of being change, natural rhythms are discovered by you as a being. So in other words, you first feel you're incapable in life. You don't know anything. Then you go and try things out and you suddenly notice certain points that your attention naturally draws. Like that's my childhood, okay? But it was foolishness. Because I realized at the end of the day, I am left with my self-generation capability of ideology. That means at the end of this life, I mean, technically, guys, whether we like it or not, we're in some sense alone. So what do I mean by that? And it's a fascinating loneliness. It's not a depressed kind of, oh no, people have been hit so hard they got to go hide in the cave. It's not one of those things. I'm telling you, it's a sort of loneliness where you recognize nobody has your eyes. And then you feel both empowered, yet at the same time made humble. Because you begin to see every person's vision responds to this world differently. And our success seems to be the collection of these responses. Now, some of these responses, when they cannot meet, when the inner reality fails to project an outer outcome, what occurs is that personality will either destroy itself or will try to rage. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you like this. I want you to see that thoughts behave before they leave your mind, before they leave this momentary awareness. Thoughts come and go. Right now I'm sitting here, and then in a little bit I'm going to be sitting somewhere else, and different thoughts are going to arise. Different ways that I see myself are going to arise. So for me, the stories we tell ourselves are important because the stories can blind us or set us free. And believe it or not, we are a civilization that in some sense perceives language as magic because it can trap someone in a room. The problem with this life is that if you seek individual truth, an infinite illusion will approach you. That's the problem. I feel it's a dead end if we just live for ourselves. And it's boring. That means after you've been on that perfect beach, like, by the water, succeeding in every physical task, then you're going to wonder about the endeavors of the mind. And the endeavors of the mind are not schooling. They are invention. It is discovery. That means when you feel like an explorer, you will have a sort of inspiration that is strangely powerful. It is strangely powerful because it feels it has seen something that has not been seen yet. And so what that means is there's two ways this can come across. Either you come and meet somebody who's seen something you haven't, and you're like, wow, there's unknown worlds, You see that person knows things you don't. And then you also see a moment where it's the edge of your reality. It is literally how much you could have understood from that moment, and now you've reached its edge. And the edge is unknown unless with greater effort you, in some sense, shine more light on that part of the forest. So now I want to get to the main concept, because usually these talks end into some sort of, I tend to walk towards serenity when I give these talks. But I'm going to tell you, the topic of today is the command of broken worlds. And the reason I've titled it that is because I find the moment a being or any system or any organization or any entity reaches a sort of failure where it feels it cannot go further, what will occur is that the ideology will not only die, but the ideology, the world that that ideology has projected will also die. And the being will reach a sort of empty staring into existence. When you reach that empty stare into this existence, that is in some sense the staircase to a state of mind that cannot be ruled by the worlds of the past. The roar of the now is being heard loudly. That's that state of mind. In other words, there's no longer a struggle of heaven and hell. It is now just whether perfection chooses to express itself or not, whether the ultimate effort within our existential attention chooses to move. And inspiration can be received from the story of the character, like you're inspired by doing something for somebody or for your world, or it can be inspired by just the opportunity, just the view that you're like, why not? Why not the ultimate be here now? Do you see? So you update your inner reality to the novelty of the moment, which can have endless new interpretations. Pretty much you create the way you use your mind, you notice certain aspects of it, certain structural aspects of it, and they become a sort of engine. An engine of an unknown gaze. That means you look at life in a way where you don't know anything about it, but because you don't know, you're constantly knowing. Trust me, the way society is designed, especially consumerism, is that it takes people towards a certain narcissism. Their whole life becomes obsessed on themselves, and then the community becomes cruel. Because people don't care, because what they have to do is more important than what others have to do. And I know this kind of is like... The broken world will acknowledge its end, and it will recognize it has been pushed by existential forces to confront the ultimate change. That means there's no point of fearing pain, because eventually in this life, the way we're designed as biological creatures is we will be pushed to the ultimate. So don't fear the end, because the end is coming. However, you are still aware of your beginning. And you're also aware of what you can do. And so the future is a luxury. It is a luxury that only, in some sense, you got to give yourself some permissions that people will never give you. You got to understand that every person has, in some sense, an intuitive wit. It's kind of like just in the nature. You're a sort of unique antenna receiving this world in a unique way. Now, if you, who have been kind of taught to just look outside, have the stories of the world be your truths rather than the stories of the awareness, the primary self. The center of my world has become matter. The center of my world has become the thought and the memory structures and how they present and orchestrate themselves, you know? And for me, after the objective interest, that means after I really was excited about this objective reality, and after then I was really excited about the subjective reality, I reached a sort of, believe it or not, preferencelessness out of an edge of an inevitable hopelessness. So I saw like a chaos that was unavoidable, and then the structures of fear, those personas within me, those ways I saw myself where fear existed in my world, they vanished, they disappeared. They as if the attention was no longer lingering on inefficiency. Wield your attention like the sword of a humble king. To understand life means to comprehend why you're standing under a cosmos this vast. I feel that if we limit ourselves to our knowledge, we miss out on how far that knowledge can reveal the world to us. I feel that technology is replacing all the things man had to explore himself. I feel that children are growing in a world that's gonna be. There's many people who look at up at the sky and they're like, God, why have you done this? You know. And so the reason I find the psychology behaves that way is that, believe it or not, I constantly say in these talks, we're a young species. That means many behaviors are only kept because the being didn't know better or didn't put an effort to know themselves better. Subjectively, we all share a commonality of form entering from absence. And so that seems to be a sort of collective field. And a collective field, in some sense, suggests a collective entity. That means for the first time in the mind of the human species, questions are arising that are asking if the universe led to individually conscious creatures, would it have possibly also led to collectively conscious creatures? And then we see our biggest horror being the inspiration of our tech industry. That we are trying to create machines so able that we will choose them over the natural world, and we will enter simulations of endless blindness because existence has been forgotten and a falsehood has been accepted as the truth. For me, when I read that poem, I don't remember exactly the name of the artist, the name of the poet. Who's it by? Oh, Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas, like I'll tell you this poem he has. Here, I'll read the poem. Dylan Thomas from 1914 to 1953. Do not go gentle into that good night. This is by far, I think, one of the most historical and wonders of literature, this poem. Anyways, he says, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Thou wise men at their end know dark is right. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. I find those two last sentences, do not go gentle into that good night, rage against the dying light of the light being, and a perfect uh, representation of the inner struggle of each conscious creature to continue. And that's our style. That's the kind of jacket humanity is wearing. We will rage. We will fight. You know? That's just the cool quality of our species. We have an animalistic kind of warriors-like species. Yet at the same time, we are a warrior-like species who has found a greater ability to see. And so the evolution of sight was the main director of the evolution of biology. That means what the data this evolutionary ape was exposed to catalyzed it towards where it needs to be. So pretty much a world existed, you can consider that as if eyes were open, and then our eyes opened in this world that was already here. From eternal existence come temporal stories. And sometimes the characters in these stories, they cannot meet the conclusions of their story. They cannot reach the end. And when they cannot reach the end, the world breaks. And when the world breaks, the only command is left. The continuation of existential intelligence to still bringing forth design. If they ask me what am I, I'll tell you I'm eyes in a world of design. In a world in many shapes, many layers, many dimensions, many modes of access and availability. Once chaos has delivered the final blow, the chaos will see without the order, it will cease to exist as it is. So the ego of the evil will protect the ego of the good, and the ego of the good will protect the ego of the evil. Yet at the same time, creatures that at their core are attributeless moments of present attention, they can either unify or they can die from their communication. And through unity comes a sort of poetic justice to preserve art. And when art is preserved, the greatest ideas can rise with freedom. That means people will no longer be seen as strangers in the world. They will be seen as sort of comrades in the same world that they choose to live. The evolution of the eyes of man into the purity of a cosmic presence. Unspeakable, attributeless. Who can tell the sky its end? As if the easiest thing that every fortune teller could say, I don't know what the hell people are doing going to fortune tellers. Like, you go ask the fortune teller, tell me my future. The best answer is it's all going to change, man. That's it. Because it will. You see, change is a host that we are a guest of. Because when I sleep at night, I see my fears do not echo in my deep sleep. Yet there's a primary awareness that is in some sense understood through your stillness and silence. So believe it or not, you're like this bewildered, evolved animal, and you gotta calm down and go towards stillness and silence. And when you confront the true presence of stillness and silence, you reach that sort of ending point, that sort of zero before any other number was put in. And then arises from the ashes of a fallen world new dimensions. Like the feathers on the wing of an endless bird, that its wings were so long that if we were to walk on the wings of this eagle, we could not see the end of the other wing. The mind is a sort of your free will animates you. Trust me, like as I'm speaking right now, these words, the movement of my body, these sounds, they are not me, they are expressions. They are like as if I am this, my thought, the same relationship my thoughts have to me who generate or become aware of them in some sense, is the same relationship that man has with God. That means my attention is a God of my thought, because free will seems to be that part of the universe that could do anything, that could do something in some dimension, anything. And I find that something that's really hard for many species to wrap their head around is that they're given a visible, observable world. But if they just become obsessed with this visible, observable world, they will never explore the unknown dimensions of every moment. You think right now your moment is just what you see. So, what is beyond existence? Guess what? Language can't talk about it. Language has its limits. And when this is a concept I've created, the language threshold. When we move beyond the language threshold, in some sense, we're moving beyond the veil of thoughts. And the veil of thoughts is only kept there because the world has a dualistic condition for you, or it is not valid. When that dualistic precondition leaves the story of your world, you find yourself already standing in a sort of uh, pre-translated moment, and you feel the freedom of sight in an endless world, in an endless existence, and you just recognize the quality of humility. And for me, I think the purpose of religion or any thought is to keep an idea alive in the minds of men. The intelligence of the moment is so unique, guys, that whatever you look at objectively, as if the simultaneity of your sensory perception is also the simultaneity of your subjective construction. A man in a moment will wonder if he's a moment experiencing the projection of a man. And so, what if there's a way to move that has nothing to do with our lens? In some of my talks, I have a feeling I haven't uploaded the talk. What I gave a talk on a certain notion that an individual existence in this plane of existence, in this observable plane of existence, can be, in some sense, multiple beings in another dimension. And what I mean by that is like just like how your cells become tissues in your body, a group of cells, imagine if the tissue became conscious and was like, what am I? And would realize it is a group of cells. Now, when we understand this, we recognize the potential and the ability of consciousness. Consciousness is the space for hope to occur. And if your eyes are open, believe it or not, they say anything is possible, they're right. Because whatever your attention goes, you will endlessly move towards. You only fail when you take your eye off the ball. When your attention no longer lingers on a certain result. Concentration is an incredible ability. To teach a child to concentrate is to teach a child how their mind can move in the world. And it's all about reality preservation. Because the youth don't know how fast the world changes, and in some sense, the older audience of mankind knows how fast the world changes and then has to acknowledge the inevitable. As if when you're young, you're concerned about getting old, and when you're old, you're concerned about not existing. You see, and so eventually the dynamic keeps moving, as if this layout you see, you suddenly change, and again that same layout appears, and you change, and it's one of those things where like the guy goes to India but realizes his problem is not an outer problem, it's not an environmental problem, it's an inner problem in regards to the responsibility for the activity accepted in the world to be. So for me, I don't know. There was a time I thought it was good that people would go into Nate like these yoga. Like how can I tell you? Each era commands has a different command of responsibility for the people. Each era exposes things. There are things happening in the world right now that my ancestry couldn't even conceptualize. Yet I am here in this world, and it's as if when I carry the DNA of my ancestry, in some sense, the eyes of my ancestry are a part of my eyes. So I appreciate the biological sort of torch being passed down through every moment due to the DNA. I appreciate, for me, my body is a sort of, believe it or not, it's a, that's why like somebody asked me like, why don't you get tattoos? I'm like, bro, it's like, why does it matter? For me, it's a sort of like my moment is my temple, and when I'm conscious of my temple, then the world goes in accordance to a sort of uh, like the way I understand the world aligns to the way that I naturally am. That's the beautiful thing, guys. You don't understand. Like I'll tell you this. Somebody a great advice a friend of mine gave me was she said, like we were talking about like a sort of metaphysical psychology and something. But she she said live a day without expectations. Like she didn't say that, but like it was something like that. Okay? And so I lived the day without having an expectation. And it was very interesting because I had no reaction to what would happen. Not a sort of numbness to it, but like anger couldn't arise because I didn't expect it to. Hate, suffering didn't arise because I didn't expect it to. And even if it arose, I didn't even expect that to arise. A sort of kind of conscious detachment from every stimulus of the moment. And I want to, in some sense, I guess, say something about this picture I've chosen. I don't know who made this, but it had a profound significance for me because I have no idea what's going on in the picture, but the guy seems to be consciously involved in a sort of breaking of this giant sphere. You know what, how I would conceive? This guy's between dimensions. He's between worlds. And while between worlds, he's seeing his knowledge break. In this science fiction story I wrote, it's I'm going to tell you a scene from it, as if it was a movie. I'm going to tell you a scene. It's as if in the year, I don't know, 2100 or 200 or 300 or something. I don't know the exact date. I think I wrote 2100. It's as if humanity has messed up living on the earth and everybody is living in sky cities. And these cities on the sky are magnetically powered, so in some sense they can't go anywhere aside being from there. On what do you call it? On the like in the sky or whatever, in the orbit. And so what happens is, in this story, I conclude that the first alien contact occurs after humanity has messed up living on the surface of the earth. And the story begins that a sort of general who's in a sort of hidden king sort of governance of all these sky cities, but is a good man. He has a son who goes to like these sky city schools, like everyone's living in these sky cities, and the son goes to the school and their history is false, as if they lost a lot of human knowledge, so their history of what humans were is false. So what happens is this general that's ruling all these sky systems, sky cities, suddenly an alien approaches. This alien enters and has at least some form that they can recognize as similar to human or whatever, but he's an alien. And this alien suddenly says, I am here to liberate and enlighten your species. So luckily, instead of the first alien contacting Earth being violent, this is the most enlightened alien, like from, let's say, the Andromeda Galaxy or something, approaching, um, like making contact with Earth or whatever. This is all in the science fiction story I wrote. I think I titled Language. So, anyways, what happens is this alien is asked who are you? Like these people are shocked. Like the general is shocked. Like this alien's appeared out of nowhere in the hall of the general, and then the general is like, who are you? And something like that. And the alien suddenly scans for a second and tells them, you can call me Language, and tells them that your civilization has not evolved beyond language. You know. And so this is the story where the first alien that makes contact with humanity is language. It's a sort of a metaphor I've included in the story. So what happens is this general sees this alien's about to enlighten the world, and he has his ego come in, and he's like, before you go teach the world of all this, please teach my son. And so the whole story begins, the whole point of this novel begins to focus on the questions that this kid asks the son of this general from this alien called Language. And the kid begins asking first questions about himself, about the history of the world, as if there's a moment him and the alien Language are looking outside of the edge of the fence of the sky city, looking at a burnt earth. You know? And so the kid, for example, asked somewhere I wrote, the kid asked the aliens this, are there any living human beings on the surface? And then the alien says, yes, 3. But if you bring them here, they cannot integrate into society. They have become beasts. You know, something like that. Eventually, the kid begins, after asking questions about himself, recognizing the truth of the story of the world and realizing how he's a truth beyond the story of the world. And to be honest, I haven't gotten to a point where I've ended the novel, but it's like the ideas are still building. So my point with that was that beyond the limitations of language, the idea of the broken world fades before the actual occurrence, as if the idea of a miserable self or an incapable self vanishes or is eradicated, as if it never existed. And then you function in a world where the odds are no longer against you, because that concept ceases to function. Any thought can be put into motion. Just like how I could roll a bowling ball, I can, in some sense, through dialogue, enter the depth of a concept. It has to do with a sort of momentum, a sort of conceptual momentum. Because I'm telling you, your thoughts have a speed, you don't acknowledge it. You know? And you can notice that at different times there's different speeds. That means there's been moments I've sat down and I've barely had a thought. I've just been existing in that moment. And there's been moments where the thoughts have been moving at such a fast speed, and they had certain dimensions, as if like I called them consciousness streams. So what that meant is like certain language and ideology and imagery was just passing so quickly in my awareness, and 3 lines of this, 3 streams of this, like 3, you could call it as like 3 windows where things were, concepts and images and certain things were arising. And as if I was just watching existence and my subjective existence happened. Just like how I watch objective reality, I was observing this subjective reality, and it was very profound because it was a way where it was as if for the first time I was standing away from my mind and watching it. But I wasn't. It was all in the moment, you know. So I'm not saying I stood behind like it wasn't. It's not like a Casper thing. It's that you go out of body when your attention is not a body to itself. It's a kind of recognition that you keep the boundaries of your existence conceptually, and you choose to change them. And you have to honor your experience, but you have to honor the wisdom of the world as well. And the wisdom of the world means that no one man has the answers, because the true answer involves the collective's effort. So the command of broken worlds is a sort of same existential command that the phoenix feels to rise from the ashes. The first attempt at building heaven on earth was actually made by this monk from a branch of Buddhism called Pure Lands Buddhism, where this monk it was so thought of that he had created a dimension where beings could go and be free, as if he had created a bunker that was protecting people against the cyclical forces of karmic existence. Because for me, I'm like, what is this? Does Buddhism believe the world is a sort of torture mechanism of souls? Like, what is this? Are we like sheep being pushed to a slaughterhouse of endless, meaningless existence? And I realized no. It cannot be a story, the truth. The truth can be communicated in stories, but the truth is as much of a messenger as the one who says it. Do you understand? It is the messenger is a mirror, for the truth is received behind your eyes. Once you, in some sense, abide by the Tao of the moment, you reach your mind kind of becomes the mind of the moment. So you stop it's like in a changing world, you stop trying to change things. And when you stop trying to change things in a changing world, the thought structure, in some sense, melts like snow in the light of your attention. I remember listening to Alan Watts, and his whole idea was that life happens to you rather than you happen to life. But I say that the inner reality is you happening to life. The outer reality is life happening to you. One can even say the unknown was a metaphor for God, the unknowable, an attribute of truth that it cannot be known only with knowledge. This is why Sufi dervishes, they had this hilarious saying. They would say, those who try to just intellectually engage life, they will, believe it or not, it's kind of, they will reach moments where it's like they're whipping a dead donkey to run faster. Or in some sense, another way of saying it is like you take a lion and you put it in a cage and you think that's what a lion is. Sometimes the intellect can cage you in a certain modality of acceptance of reality rather than realizing it is changing all the time. This is why one's style is created out of their response to the moment, and the more authentic and natural their response to their moment, the more they will discover the style of their true nature. And the style of your true nature becomes a natural way, where ideology comes to you because there's nowhere to go. The moment exists now in its stature. So think of it this way: the light of the sun was a command the sun gave. The sun was like my beams shall reach the end of the universe, and the beams of the sun came. And the beams of the sun hit, in some sense, the surface of our planet. And they hit it in a sort of cyclical pattern. And after this infusion of light with a cyclical surface, in the change of, in the contact of light with the surface of our world, the stories of our life began generating. The darkness and the light, the war of good and evil. The war of good and evil is just like somebody turning the light on and off. At night it was dark, there were predators, people had to become defensive. They had to, after this being, after this evolutionary creature, in some sense it was like the movement of nature all without consciousness, and suddenly, bam! Like it became aware, oh my god, this body is me, that's the world, holy shit. You know, and then it began running. And what happened is it began, after discovering the first state, that it is separate from the world, it began comparing and then going into another moment and being like, holy shit, I'm being a separate being here, and I'm also being a separate being in this part of the world, like this part of the ground, and that part, and that part. And you begin to see eventually from the same and not same moment occurring constantly, there comes a sort of momentum. So for me, our evolution arises from our conscious evolution, arises from the moment where not only the first separation was realized, but the first separation of the first separation. That means before I can hold the badge of my name, you know, I have to in some sense hold the shape of my world. You can say the purpose of life is a changing story for your mind. For your body, it is transformation. The forms are connected right now, appreciated while they're connected, while your atoms are all in some organization of your biological form, appreciate this, but also acknowledge these atoms are under your command for a little while. As if eternity is sculpting temporal reality in a certain way for a little while. Truth is the perfect balance between your inner reality and outer reality. Truth is the primary world. It's your first universal philosophy that underlies every philosophy you currently have. You have to, in some sense, take your inner child out of the gutter of its conditioning by realizing it is not that it was never an inner child. It was a moment. And I know the word moment sounds super simple, but it honestly is. A lot of complex problems fade through a simple state of mind. You can choose to control the intensity of how you receive your karma by your state of mind. And compassion, as the Tibetan Buddhist masters in some sense preached, they said, love the world. Because why hate it? They said love the world, because in loving your world, you automatically love yourself, which means automatically you give permission for your true self to be alive. And you realize it is not death that commands life. Without life, death would not exist. That is how powerful life is. This is why God in religious texts, the Almighty God, asked his angels, archangels, his superior creations to bow down to man. And I'm saying this, of course, respectfully um, to the religious ideology, but in some sense, God says to the archangels to bow down, and one archangel doesn't. Now, if we acknowledge this story to be something received by the mind, we can say that it can be aspects of the mind. That means, how can evolutionary biologists get angry at people, at religious people, when they don't realize it was their biological evolutionary, like it was like they are biological creatures that fell into that story of the world. We all are clothed and masked in stories. Yet the free will is purer than any story. It is attributeless. Consciousness is attributeless, which means the matter that thinks is conscious is also attributeless. That means the projector on the wall is projecting existence. Life is the light of the projector. The story of our life is the movie projected. The wall that it's projected on is the firm existential truth of objective reality. Yet, what is powering the story of the world to still happen? A character in a video game cannot tell the one who's holding the controller how to move. The body cannot tell your mind what to do, and in some sense, the mind, your subjective focal point of existence, cannot in some sense reach the unknown depths of intelligence. So you become an explorer of the moment's occurrence. You watch this great happening. There's nothing to fear, nothing to believe, nothing to disbelieve. It's just a happening. And each person has a unique translation system. Their biology, like the way you look at the world, it's being translated in some sense, subjectively. So we are biological engines designed to produce a subjective freedom that frees us from just thinking that we are the only source of intelligence. Pretty much the body's purpose was thought, and thought's purpose was to see beyond the body. And when it saw beyond the body, it saw itself as a thought, yes, and that's the inner paradoxical point, as if when you go really within, you realize that what was out was actually within. You don't worship the brain just like somebody who bases their certainty on one fact. For me, there was idol worship back in the day, now there's idea worship. Oh man. We worship ideas like they are our only means to experience. Language should not lead to violence. Language should lead to the greatest evolution. An opportunity is given once. Every person is alive every day once. And the final command of broken worlds is the inspiration of eyes that were open before they could be closed. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you got any comments or anything, you can share it. Omar Khayyam said, be happy for this moment. This moment is your life. This moment is where life is happening. Much blessings and namaste.